Welcome back to another video on the channel. So the 2022 Australian Open medical exemption saga continues to roll on. Novak Djokovic is still in the detention hotel, and the more truths that are unearthed, the messier this situation gets. And Tennis Australia have been brought into this whole dispute this morning, and in my opinion are to blame for this whole situation dragging on as it has. So from my understanding and what I've read this morning and what's came out in the Australian media this morning is that the federal government informed Tennis Australia back in November it would not allow international rivals to bypass the vaccine requirements on the basis that a player or person had COVID within the last 6 months. The Victorian Health Department and Tennis Australia expert panel granted exemptions to 3 players in Australia, including Novak Djokovic, because the panels believed a prior infection warranted an exemption. However, the federal government, as I said there, told them back in November that that was not the case. I believe Tennis Australia failed to communicate this to players and staff, that a positive COVID test within the last 6 months would be enough to get into Australia and the Australian Open, which was simply not true. So the lack of communication there from Tennis Australia to the people participating in the Australian Open has simply not been good enough. So yesterday, a Russian women's tennis player who had received a medical exemption into the Australian Open from Tennis Australia was deported back into a deportation hotel, and looks like her visa will be cancelled and she'll be sent back home. Presumably she's had COVID in the last 6 months and was granted a medical exemption, then made into Australia incorrectly. So again, that's completely Tennis Australia's fault for not communicating the rules legally in the first place. Moving on to the Djokovic situation now. So this has all got very messy. The situation has dragged on far too long. Should never have came to this. The organisation, the communication should be far, far better than what it has been. I think whether you are anti-vax or pro-vax, I think it's become irrelevant. And similar to what Nick Kyrgios and Rafael Nadal came out and said, Djokovic and other players have had their chance to be vaccinated, and it would make international travel, entering the tournaments a lot easier if it was a case of you're either vaccinated or you don't come. Yes, that would make entry requirements and international travel a lot easier. I do agree. But Tennis Australia chose to include medical exemptions. Tennis Australia invited Novak Djokovic and invited every other player that hadn't been vaccinated to the tournament, or at least to apply for medical exemption. So Djokovic hasn't done anything wrong at all here. He's went through the process of applying for medical exemption. It was reviewed by 2 independent bodies, and he was approved. He was told that he could travel to Australia and enter the Australian Open, which was complete misinformation. So when Djokovic went on Instagram the other day and announced that he was travelling to Australia with an exemption, was that wrong? Yes, in my opinion. Would he have been in Australia now, ready to compete at the Australian Open? Probably yes. That isn't the problem. As I said there, Djokovic went through the process and he was approved. Djokovic immediately received backlash while he was travelling to Melbourne from the Australian public and people all around the world that an unvaccinated person was travelling into a country in lockdown, and that had a massive rise in cases recently. I think that forced the government's hands to react, and this has certainly got political now, especially with an upcoming election in Australia. Craig Tiley has made, for anyone who doesn't know, is the tournament director and, runs Tennis Australia. He's made a complete mess of this situation, and it's sad for him. He's a person that I really like. I think he's created a fantastic event at the Australian Open. His innovation's fantastic. I think he consistently tries to look of ways to improve Australian Open and take it to the next level. It's one of the best sporting events in the sporting world, in my opinion. He cares about players. But this is inexcusable. It's brought tennis massively into dispute. It's dragged Novak Djokovic's reputation incorrectly, apparently, in my opinion, through the mud. And this is meant to be one of the best events in sport, the best tennis event across the calendar. and it's completely brought tennis into a terrible situation, one that doesn't look like ending anytime soon. And his position, in my opinion, is untenable. I'm not sure how he can continue and come back from this. So just moving on now to a few tweets from pro tennis players, and Benjamin Locke saying there, if Novak was denied his exemption, he wouldn't have went to Australia. Completely true. He was legally approved by rules put in place for an exemption, yet when he arrived, those same people blocked his entry and publicly humiliated him. This is no way to treat anyone, let alone your 9-time champion. And I think Djokovic has been unfairly vilified. His reputation's been dragged through the mud, and it's nothing to do, despite many reports and the opinions of many misinformed people of the public, that people jump on the bandwagon and immediately think Djokovic is just trying to walk into Australia, being self-entitled because he's world number one, because he's wealthy, got a massive status in the sporting world, and expected to walk into Australia. It's completely false, completely incorrect. He went through a process. He was guaranteed by Tennis Australia that if he was granted that medical exemption, that he could travel to Australia, he'd compete at the Australian Open. That was complete misinformation, and that was Tennis Australia's fault for giving him that information incorrectly. Again, Benjamin Locke has said, Australia are making a mockery of the greatest player of all time. You're also caught up in who is vaccinated and who isn't, that you forget everything Novak has done on and off the court for Australia, including those donations to the wildfires in 2020. Show some respect. And finally, Nick Kyrgios. And I think if you know Kyrgios is on the side of Novak Djokovic, or edging that way in particular, then you know something has certainly gone wrong. He said, look, I definitely believe in taking action. I got vaccinated because of others and for my mum's health. But how we are handling Novak's situation is bad, really bad, and goes on to say he's a great champion and he's a human being. They should do better. And like Kyrgios and Nadal have said, he had his opportunity to get vaccinated. He would have guaranteed his entry into the tournament all across the world. It would have been no problem if he'd been vaccinated. That's sort of become irrelevant. You know, Djokovic rightfully gained entry according to the Australian Open into it with a medical exemption, yet he didn't really have the medical exemption to get a visa into Australia, as the government informed Tennis Australia back in November. It's all very, very complicated, but I think we are sort of starting to reach a conclusion. So what happens now? Djokovic technically shouldn't get a visa. Having a positive COVID test within the last 6 months is not enough to receive entry into Australia if you are completely unvaccinated. But as I've said a number of times, he was misinformed, and this is completely Tennis Australia's fault. You cannot blame Novak Djokovic for traveling to Australia with a medical exemption. He was told that he could enter Australia and the tournament. Should he miss out on the potential of winning Grand Slam and millions of dollars because Tennis Australia failed to communicate the rules correctly? Completely unfair in my opinion, but again, that's not enough to warrant a visa into Australia. And will the government U-turn and give him an exemption? I'm not so sure. I'd be surprised if he played now, given the timescale as well between now and the tournament starting, around 10 days. Not great for preparation, but you do wonder, would Djokovic have stuck it out in the deportation hotel for 4 days if he wasn't confident that he could make it into the tournament? Probably not. So it really could go either way. I expect Novak Djokovic will sue Tennis Australia. It's either going to hugely impact his preparations or completely knock him out of the tournament. You know, Djokovic is a player that's chasing greatness. He's one Grand Slam title away from becoming the most successful male player of all time. He's won the title 9 times. It's an opportunity to win millions of dollars. So he's been misinformed. His reputation's been severely impacted because of all this situation. But hopefully this is the last video I have to make on this. I believe we are going to get a decision on Sunday evening. So that's Monday morning in Melbourne of what the outcome is. Will he receive a visa into the country? Will he not? Will he be sent home? We're about to find out. I'm looking forward to just finding out now and getting an end to this situation. Hopefully it calms down next week when we do get a conclusion and we can focus on what will be a brilliant tennis tournament. I think the rest of the players that are there ready to compete deserve the right media coverage, the right support on and off court. and the tournament can hopefully go ahead and be sort of rescued after this horrendous situation that's occurred. If you do have any of your opinions of what's going on and what you think will happen in the end, then do leave them in the comment section below. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you on the next video.